Good morning, everybody. I'm Ann Mall. I don't know all of the students here, but I know your names and I've heard great stories. I just wanted to say congratulations on getting to this point. What an exciting opportunity to be at this point and nervous, right? The great part that I always loved when my mentors were with me, they'd say, remember, you know more about this, that if you forget something, most people won't know that you've forgotten it. So if you get in there and you forget something, don't be nervous. Just go, oh, I forgot it. Or just go back to it. Just enjoy this. This is a chance for you to just sing and dance and share everything that you've been working super hard for. I recognize a lot of the names over this last couple of years. Grateful to have you here, but just you've earned this, and we are excited to let the rest of the world see your beautiful faces and your amazing research. So congratulations on behalf of the school and on behalf of the college. Super proud.
Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to CMC Sustainability and Ecosystem Science Conference. I'm Kim Langmate, the professor and program chair of the Bachelor of Arts degree in Integrated Sustainability. And I want to start off by thanking all of you for being here and joining us this morning for our student presentations and keynote speaker. We've got our president, Dr. Matt Gianeschi, here, who's going to join us in a few minutes for his welcome remarks. And our keynote speaker will be later this morning. That's Dr. Len Necefer. And of course, we've got our presenting capstone students who are graduating with their capstone research presentations. I want to acknowledge them for all of their hard work and preparation for this morning. You've put a lot into that, and we really appreciate you showing up here. I also want to thank our students' families and friends, partners, pets, and the landscapes that have supported them in getting to this moment in their academic careers here, and thank you so much. I also want to thank Valerie Lemaster, our conference coordinator and our partnerships and experiential learning strategist, the IT staff who are supporting us today, Troy Fisher, Josh Rubin, Eric Ingram. I also want to thank our moderators, Dean Ann Mall and Dean John Lawrence. And I also want to thank Dr. Ian McCullough, Dr. Emily Schultz, Tina Evans, Kevin Hilmer-Pegram as our breakout room moderators, and also Professor Monia Hazelhorst, who has also taught one of the capstone courses for our students. So thank you everyone for pulling this all together. We have over 330 people registered this morning, including 75 community partners, 66 students, and 50 or more family and friends. People are zooming in from 19 states and 8 foreign countries. So the agenda for this morning, we will, after I'm finished telling you about the agenda, we'll start off with opening remarks from our president, Dr. Matt Gianeschi. Then we will open the breakout rooms. There's going to be 4 color-coded breakout rooms with moderators assigned, and we'll be sharing that information on the main screen so you'll know exactly where to go. There'll be easy wayfinding, and we've got moderators in the central room here to help participants get into the room where they want to go. And participants are also welcome to move around between the breakout rooms. The breakout rooms will go from let's see, we will, sorry, the breakout rooms will open at 9:30 and they will go until 10:55. We'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll start with our keynote speaker, Dr. Len Necefer, at 11 o'clock. And after that, we'll have time for some question and answer, and you are welcome to post your questions in the chat as we go. Also, a few housekeeping reminders. If you'd like to use closed caption, you should have a button at the bottom of the screen that says More, and then you can click on Show Captions. And we'd like you to keep your microphones on mute unless you are moderating or presenting. All right, now, so I would like to welcome and introduce our CMC president, Dr. Matt Gianeschi. Dr. Gianeschi is the 10th president of Colorado Mountain College, and he was appointed by our Board of Trustees in 2024. Prior to becoming president, Dr. Gianeschi served for 10 years as CMC's Chief Operating Officer and Chief of Staff. And before coming to CMC, he held many roles working on education at the executive level, including as Deputy Executive Director for the Colorado Department of Higher Education, Senior Education Advisor to Governor Bill Ritter, and Chief Academic Officer for the Colorado Department of Higher Education. Dr. Gianeschi was raised in Denver, Colorado. His parents were also college educators. And I know that Dr. Gianeschi is a talented and passionate educator who also continues to teach courses for CMC students in economics and history. So thank you both, Dr. Gianeschi and Len. We really look forward to having you here this morning and joining us for the keynote speaker. You are our keynote speaker. Thank you so much for being here. And your session will begin at 11 o'clock. So take it away, Dr. Gianeschi.
Thanks, Kim. And before I begin, since we have Len off mute and on camera, Len, why don't you give us a 30-second overview of what students and our guests will expect to see when they have the chance to join you after the student presentations?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I'm really excited to be able to talk to you all. I like to say that the presentation I'm going to give is going to be sort of a off-label use of a PhD in an education, but in many ways using the knowledge and ideas that you all are learning in the classroom and applying it into contexts that I think could provide interesting knowledge about the future. So I'll be talking about some of the expeditions that I've done and some of the work that I've done through storytelling and skiing and pack rafting and going to like various parts of the world and tying in, of course, the ways of knowing that I brought along tell these journeys.
Thanks, Len. And truly for the guests, maybe if you haven't met Len, I had the good fortune to spend some time with him yesterday, and we have a connection in common. I went to graduate school in Tucson, and he lives in Tucson, so we were able to share that with Tina Evans, who was also born and raised in the old Pueblo. So anyway, I will tell you that I am very eager to hear Len speak. It's going to be a great conversation, and for those who invited Len, thank you. He's a terrific choice for our conversation today. So as I begin, so to the students again, congratulations. This is the very best time of the year at Colorado Mountain College. And this is when we prepare. It's a stressful time. We're in finals. Faculty members are putting in grades. I know that feeling. I do it myself. I'm not teaching this term, but I do teach typically every fall. And so do know the feeling of being at the end and both the exhilaration and the exasperation of kind of reaching the end. But students, congratulations to all of you. We are so proud of you, and you are the reason why we are here. And so thank you for your efforts to make CMC great, and we'll look forward to seeing all of your work today. So I'm going to start a presentation. I have about 16 minutes, I think, or so, according to the plan that they gave me. So I'm going to try to stay on time. But what I'm going to do is I want to talk a little bit about what happens after your ideas. So you have these great ideas you've been working on. You have these wonderful concepts of how you're going to make the world better. Well, how do you actually get those things into practice? So what are ways that you can think about that? And the way that I know best, and the area, as you heard from my background, I used to work in the policy world. And so I want to give you a little introduction to what you might expect as you start to think about where you go from here. So I'll give you a little overview of the policy process. And this is supposed to be starting. Here we are. So a little bit about the policy process. And I recognize that many of you are not thinking about policy, and that's okay. I'm not here to tell you you must be involved in policy, but many of the ideas you care about have a policy component. And so I want to give you a little flavor of where you might go with these great ideas that you have as you continue to move forward. So this is also informed by a major initiative that we have underway at CMC. So if you are new, if you're a guest who's zooming into this call, this may be new to you, but most everybody else is familiar that Colorado Mountain College is engaged in a significant civics initiative. And part of our civics initiative, we are not trying to just inundate students with history and civics and other things, but we're trying to help our students recognize their voice and help them understand how to take action and move their learning into action. This picture here was taken a few weeks ago, and I was able to take 31 CMC students, including a few students who are on the call today. We had at least one ecosystem science graduate who was with us, and a couple of sustainability, sorry for the shorthand, sustainability students who were with us as well. But took them down to the Capitol, showed them how the policy world works. Even showed them some of the secrets of the Capitol, even where the unmarked bathrooms are, so that they can navigate their way through the state capitol if they ever choose to do that. But watch for things that are occurring as part of CMC's Civics Initiative. Just as part of this, and I just want to make one little plug here while I'm talking to all of you, is that next week, we actually do have, next Tuesday, we're having a Western Slope Civics Symposium here in Glenwood Springs at Mortgage Commons, and I'll be joined by the president of Colorado Mesa University, John Marshall, and he and I are going to have a fun event. It's a lively, it'll be entertaining, but also serious at times, to talk about how colleges, in particular colleges on the Western Slope, attempt to address civics and First Amendment rights and other things and freedom of speech issues on campus in 2026. There are other things that will be happening, but please be on the lookout for those. But again, next Tuesday will be an immediate opportunity for you to potentially participate. So before I get into the policy process, I want to tell a little bit of a story because it relates to what I'm going to present to you as far as the policy work. You all may know this, but for those who are our guests may not know that Colorado Mountain College actually started as just an idea. And it was an idea that some individuals had that were living in Glenwood Springs at the time, and they decided to create a college. And they did it on their own. They went to the legislature and were told, no, you cannot have a college in the mountain communities. At the time, 1965, the mountains were considered too small, too remote, too hard to reach. And so individuals got together and created a college on their own. But then once the college was created, and that was a ballot initiative, so that is a policy process. They did put a ballot question forward to the voters of our region to create CMC. But once the college was created, there was actually no physical presence. There was no place for a college. And so the story goes, and I'll skip to the end here. I won't share all the details, but it ended up that in Glenwood Springs in particular, there were a group of ranchers that actually had no background in education, but they got together and donated what is now the Spring Valley campus. And that became a very significant point of interest for the college, and from which the college grew to now 11 campuses across 9,000 square miles. Our service area is bigger than many states in the United States. But one thing I think is important is that we were able to leverage that land for the benefit of sustainability and the future of CMC. So here's a little video about from one of those major donors who gave us the land over 50 years ago.
Good that the land will be opened and preserved.
What makes me, most proud of this is really the permanence of maintaining who we are as an institution, and always having a reminder of where we've come from the Nislaniks and the Quigleys and the other families that made this college possible. I'm Matt Gianeschi. I'm the president of Colorado Mountain College.
Jim Nislanik. Different ranchers donated property to the CMC. The purpose of the donation was for education, and it still is. It turned out good.
It turned out great.
Very good, yeah. We need open space, and we need ag land that's left in ag.
we as an institution care deeply about the environment where we have the opportunity to work. Part of it is the heritage of this area in maintaining what is uniquely Colorado Mountain College. There are no other institutions that have campuses like we have in some of the most beautiful places in the world. And we run a variety of academic programs that depend on open space, that use these spaces. So our sustainability program, our ecosystem science programs. The students are often out in the field. They're doing that work. They're measuring the number of insects per acre and all the other work that goes along with that. And so I think it aligns with our values. It aligns with the academic programs at the college, and it allows us to preserve the legacy of what is uniquely Colorado Mountain College. So no big ideas happen alone. Everything requires a partnership, and you have to have trusted partners and people that you can work with. Nothing happens in these communities without a partnership. Grateful for the efforts to partner with ABLT and to do this on behalf of the communities and the students and the families that make CMC and make these communities special. Okay, so fun little video from our friends at Aspen Valley Land Trust who put that together. But why did I tell you or show you that video? One, it's a great little story. And two, it gives you a little update of where we've been since the last sustainability conference a year ago when I addressed all of you. Since that time, as you heard in the video, Colorado Mountain College Board of Trustees voted, and actually the CMC Foundation Board of Directors, and they also were directly involved in putting together a conservation easement in order to preserve 312 acres of the Spring Valley campus to maintain this wildlife corridor across this region of Colorado and immediately adjacent to our campus. Importantly, this work was directly informed by many of the people who are on this or are part of today's event, including many of the faculty and the students and the staff, especially from the Spring Valley campus, but also the sustainability faculty and staff, as well as some of your alumni, and including one person, I don't know if she's on right now, but Lauren Garcia, who is a sustainability graduate and is with Aspen Valley Land Trust. She is actually the one who helped us prepare all the paperwork. And so after graduating from CMC, went directly into this work and has since that time been involved in conservation work of this kind. So just want to celebrate CMC a little bit and also give you a little update as to sort of where we've been over the last year. Importantly, there is a policy component here, and I'll share that here in just a moment. So students, you have these big ideas. You've been working on these projects. You've been thinking about how you're going to change the world for the better, and you want to know how you take it from concept to practice. And so let me give you a little flavor of what I learned during my decade working under 3 different governors, working at the Capitol and with all different kinds of legislators and all different kinds of lobbyists and all different kinds of issues. My background's in education, so I'm going to focus on some of my where I know, but the concepts relate to all of the different ideas that you might have as well. So start with an idea. All good policy starts with an idea. You can't go anywhere. These are all human ideas. These are things that we think of as we are trying to develop opportunities for the future. Importantly, there are ways for you to activate those ideas. A lot of times people will get involved in protest and they'll say, this is the way that I can achieve my political voice. This is the way that I will share and communicate with people my either support for an idea or my opposition to an idea. This is my pleasure or displeasure of one concept or another. And let me tell you this, protest is important, but protest is insufficient to change. And this is just my experience working at the Capitol. There were protests sometimes 2 and 3 times a day when I worked at the Capitol. And so it was a very common occurrence to have different groups on the west steps of the Capitol. They're rallying for some issue or another. But it comes down to when you want to see change, it requires you to put, we can call it pen to paper, or start typing up an idea or taking those ideas and putting them on paper and trying to advance those ideas in front of whether it's a legislative body, but an elected body or somebody who has control of making changes that you think would be really beneficial. So understand the difference. Protest is important. In no way am I suggesting it's not. It's just protest is not the same as policy. Protest informs policy, but policy is where you start to see the kind of change that you care about. I'm not going to go through this. We only have a few minutes here, but you can understand the process is fairly lengthy. It looks complicated. It's really not as complicated as it seems. The way that this works effectively is that a bill gets introduced, gets assigned to a committee. The committee then wrestles with it. If they pass it through committee, it goes to the chamber as a whole, so either the Senate or the House. They decide whether they support it or not, and if they do support it, they vote on it twice. So they vote on it once to advance it to the final docket, which is called third reading, and then on the third reading, they pass it through the chamber, at which time it goes across the hall and it moves to the second chamber, and then if it's successful in the very same process, will eventually reach the governor's desk. And so pretty straight forward understanding of the civics process, but let's talk a little bit about what does it actually take to get into that process. And we don't have time today, but when I teach policy, which I do from time to time, we always start with the good old Schoolhouse Rock video. Some of you may be familiar. If you're of my generation, you remember these being on all the time. For the younger generation, go find it on YouTube. You will see the Schoolhouse Rock version of I'm Just a Bill, and that is it. I'm just a bill sitting here on Capitol Hill, waiting to get into committee. So this is truly how it works. Bills start with ideas, and ideas have to be introduced to a sponsor, and those sponsors are the people elected at the Capitol. And so this can be true also at the local level. This can be at the county level. This can be maybe at the city or town level, true. So, but somebody who's in an elected position has to introduce the concept. At the state level, we call them bills. And so you find a sponsor, you draft out an idea and say, here's what I'm trying to work on. If they agree to carry that bill for you, then they will be the ones who introduce the bill. But some of the things that you've been working on as a sustainability student or as an ecosystem science student, maybe you've taken a class in sustainable economics, or maybe you've taken a statistics class or other things, but you're going to have to wrestle with the fiscal impact of what you're trying to introduce. And so know that there is math involved. It's usually just addition and subtraction and maybe multiplication. So it's fairly simple math, but math is nonetheless required as you try to understand and estimate what it will take to actually take your idea into practice, into the real world. So here's a fiscal note. This is a bill that Lauren Garcia and the AVLT team brought to my attention. This is an active bill. It is sitting in the chamber right now. It's in the Senate right now, but this is House Bill, so that HB means House Bill 26, 2026, 1230. And that just means it's the 230th bill introduced on the House side. And so there are over 700 bills introduced in a given year. Every single one of those bills has to have a fiscal impact estimate. And this is one that would expand the conservation easement tax credit concept. And this is an idea that directly informs CMCs and others' abilities to enter into those conservation easements we were just talking about. So understand that this is the type of thing that you and the expertise you're developing and all the things that you've been working on to get to the point of presenting your concept today. Now you're going to have to say, well, okay, it's a great idea. Well, what does it cost? How many people might be involved in introducing that? How do we start to wrestle with this and think whether or not it is feasible or infeasible for the future of the state of Colorado? Well, how you decide that is often not your choice. One of the things I tell students in public policy is that you don't get everything you want just because you want it. And it doesn't matter how much you want it. You have to go talk to people. Politics is a contact sport. And so you have to go engage with the legislature, and you have to go engage with the opposition. You have to listen to people and understand why they might be for or against your idea. Even the people who are against your idea are going to be very helpful to you in understanding why they're against your idea. That will help you understand how to address those concerns as you're talking to either legislators or state departments or others, or trying to estimate a fiscal impact. Most important is that be prepared to compromise. Compromise is frankly the lifeblood of a democracy. Without compromise, it is just majority rule, and everything is done from the top down. And you see some of that today. But I will encourage you all to just prepare yourself to understand what are the things that are most important in your idea and what are the things that you might be willing to let go. And it's not that you want to let them go, but what are the areas where you can maybe give a little bit in order to move things along, and try to become comfortable with that. And I recognize it feels like a loss. But that's part of the process, is to listen, to engage, to talk, to be willing to understand what are the core issues and what are the things that you might be willing to allow to move. If you're lucky, you get to this kind of a moment where there is a signing ceremony and the bill becomes law. This is a picture of then Governor Hickenlooper at Colorado Mountain College signing a bill that I had worked on at that time. This one was around expanding teacher education funding for our state. And so there's some of our faculty and staff who are involved in that, and many of the legislators. This is all at Mortgage Commons in Glenwood. But you get to the signing ceremony and you're lucky enough to get it through the process. But that's just the beginning. So now you just got it through the legislative process, but that's not the end. Now it goes over to the executive branch. It moves from the legislative branch to the executive branch, and now the bureaucrats get involved. We don't have time to go through all of the things that happen, but this is the department that I used to run. I used to run the Colorado Department of Higher Education. And those pieces of legislation every year would come over to my department, and it would be my responsibility to implement those laws. Sometimes I knew exactly what they were. Sometimes I wasn't exactly sure what they were. And it was my job to try to interpret how to take what the legislature just told me that I needed to do and then implement it on behalf of the citizens of the state of Colorado. Importantly, and this is just an example of kind of looking a little bit at how a department is structured. Every state department has the same kind of structure. This just happens to be the one that I used to oversee. But if you're involved in environmental issues, you might be working with natural resources, or you might be working with the Department of Public Health and Environment. There are a lot of different departments, so you have to go find where the department is that you want to go work with. But each of those departments has a division. Each division has a director. Each director has a board. And so just to understand the structure, it might be that the best place for the policy concept that you're going to present today is maybe not at the legislature. It might actually be that you want to go to the State Department and go work with the division that happens to be in charge of the idea that you're working on. And there are ways to change things because they have the authority to create rules. So those are some of the things that you can help navigate. And sometimes it just requires picking up the phone or texting or emailing somebody who's in the department and say, hey, I've got this idea. Would it be possible? Or what would it take to implement this idea that I've been working on, and get their feedback? And most of the people who work at the state will do that for you. So I'm out of time, and I hope this has been helpful for you to just get a little bit familiar with how you take these wonderful ideas that you've been working on over the last several months and you'll be presenting today, and potentially even move them forward. But again, to maybe remind yourself that what's most important here is that, going back to that idea that I shared with you before about the conservation easement in the beginning of CMC as a college, but that conservation easement that happened over the last year started with a land donation from the people, which started with a ballot initiative to create the college in the first place. And an elected board of trustees chose to put that question before them and the foundation to conserve that land. And now it's in the legislature where we might be able to expand that. And one of the people who's directly involved is a sustainability graduate from CMC. So thank you for your time. I hope that's been helpful. And congratulations again to the students, and congratulations to the faculty and staff for getting them here.
Thank you, President Gianeschi. That was a fantastic presentation on the policy process. I loved the video of the origins of the Spring Valley campus and the ranchers who donated it. And thank you so much for sharing your expertise. It's a great way to kick off this morning's conference. All right, so now we're going to transition into our breakout rooms, and I just want to tell you how this is going to work. We have 4 breakout rooms, and each of these rooms has presenting students. There's a variety of topics, and we're sharing them here on the screen. So the moderators of each of these rooms, they are color-coded. We've got the red room here with Dr. Kevin Hilmer Pegram and students Cassidy Mefford, Izzy Pace, Austin Klein, and Leanne Baina Sanchez. And so the students and other participants will choose the room that they would like to go into. And in a moment, you will see the option for the breakout rooms. You can choose the color. So do take note of the color of the room that you'd like to join and the name of the moderator. So in a moment, you'll see those appear and you'll be able to choose which room you go into. And during this morning's sessions, you'll be able to move between rooms. So you don't need to stay in the same room the whole time. Here you can see the yellow room. This is going to be moderated by Dr. Ian McCullough, and we've got students Alexandra Clark and so forth. And we'll have this posted again as you're choosing. We're just giving you a quick overview here of the different rooms. We've got the blue room with Dr. Emily Schultz and the green room with Dr. Tina Evans. So as we're getting organized here to move into rooms, I just want to let you know if you need any assistance in joining one of these breakout rooms, please use the chat feature. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you can see that there's a chat feature there. You can enter a notice to us and the moderators will help you move into the room that you'd like. So just let us know which room you'd like to join. Either ask for the student's name or the color of the room or the moderator of the room, and we will help you get there. Okay, everyone, welcome back to the CMC Sustainability and Ecosystem Science Conference. I want to congratulate all of you students out there for all of your hard work and your amazing presentations. I was able to visit some of those and you did a fantastic job. So congratulations, celebrate your success. And now I want to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Len Necefer. We're really fortunate to have Len here this morning with us. I got to meet Len last summer where he was showing his film. It is called The American Southwest, and it's a beautiful film about the Colorado River, wildlife, and restoration. Dr. Len Necefer is the CEO and founder of Natives Outdoors. It's a media and consulting company focused on environmental advocacy, outdoor recreation, and sustainability. He holds a PhD in engineering and public policy from Carnegie Mellon University and has held positions at the U.S. Department of Energy and the University of Arizona. And in addition to his work at Native Outdoors, Len serves as the president of the board for the Honnold Foundation, supporting global solar energy access initiatives. His expertise bridges engineering, policy, and business, and using storytelling to drive impact in environmental and social issues. His work has been featured in National Geographic, The Alpinist magazine, and over 50 film festivals worldwide. And in his spare time, he's an avid pack rafter, skier, climber, and mountaineer. He integrates his passion for outdoor adventure with broader discussions on sustainability, land management, and climate change. His expeditions have taken him deep into remote landscapes, exploring the intersections of water, conservation, and outdoor recreation. And you're going to hear more about that really soon here. So welcome and thank you so much, Len.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. I think when you had reached out, Kim, about potentially making this happen, I said, why not? I was a professor for a bit and I miss sharing these stories with students. But let's get started. See if we can get this going. So when I was thinking about building this presentation, I started in this talk on this keynote. I was really thinking about sort of the places where discussions happen and some of the places where I've had some of the most um, compelling learnings. And I've come back to this idea of mixing zones. And really, this is reflective of where this idea came together, which was uh, sorry, I have a cat. One second, kicking my cat out. Um, these places where changes happen rapidly, where rivers meet oceans are these incredible zones. And I was basically formulating this idea along the banks of the Klamath River. But before we talk about that and talk about mixing zones, I want to talk about actually how I got started in this work that I'm doing right now with Natives Outdoors. Over 10 years ago, I didn't know how to ski. I was 27, and I had just moved to Denver, Colorado from Washington, D.C., and working in the Department of Energy. And skiing had always been this sport that was inaccessible for me growing up in the Midwest and on the Navajo Nation. Um, and I began thinking in my spare time in the winter, I was like, there's, incredible mountains and incredible opportunities to go visit these incredible landscapes. And I just didn't know how. So when I decided to go skiing, I basically uploaded or downloaded a few YouTube videos, and I spent the better part of a few months on the bunny slopes and watching videos and learning how to ski. And in the first season, I taught myself basically how to get down black runs, and I was skiing pretty much everything in the resort, but not very well. But this larger calling came back to me about why I had originally gotten into this work. One of the things that sort of forms me as a Navajo person is this connection to our four sacred mountains. Um, and one of the things that I wanted to do from that is be able to tell the story of these mountains in a different way. And that was through my own human powered movement through these landscapes. And so at the end of the first season, I skied my first big couloir. I would like to say I side slipped most of it, but getting down is the most important thing. This is a photo I took from one of our sacred mountains, Hesperus Mountain. If you're familiar with southwestern Colorado, it's in the La Plata Range, but this is the northernmost sacred mountain. And at the end of this journey, this was done in a clockwise fashion, and this was the last mountain. And it was really a full circle moment where I was able to share this with a few other native skiers. And from that, we wrote a few pieces. But of course, these landscapes are inspiring, and I really started to see and understand how these important landscapes can be backdrops for stories about our changing world and climate change and the various pressures that we're facing with resource development in many parts of the world. And so this really came together through a series of four stories that we did. And two of them was very fortunate to have published in The Alpinist. And you can go read these online. One is called Water's Life, which was the sort of synthesis of that entire journey. But this journey of being an engineer, thinking about policy, thinking about climate change, really began sort of taking a different form when I began thinking about the things that I was doing outside as a way to convey important stories. As you all know, landscapes are a little bit more sexy than a journal article in some ways, but I really saw an opportunity to combine powerful visual imagery with the knowledge that's developed in the academy. And I think in that specific area, I think it really was responding to this moment of time and where I was seeing the way that we learn things, the way that we see things are tending to be more visual these days through social media and other things. And so this was my first sort of venture into this mixing zone of these two ideas and these two different realities that I had occupied. Um, but how did I get here? This is kind of a wandering path a little bit, but really it began with my time growing up in the Navajo Nation. I grew up in the shadow of the fourth and fifth largest coal power plants. My grandfather was a uranium miner on the Navajo Nation, and there was a lot of uranium mining that was happening in the Southwest during the Cold War. And I saw the impacts of large scale policy on my community, on my grandfather's health. He lost his left lung to silicosis when he was in his early 40s. And I also developed asthma and would consistently get bronchitis in the winter. And I began sort of connecting the dots and seeing that these larger policy systems was having a direct impact on my life. And I wanted to figure out a way to change this, to hopefully make it something so some other person in the future could live a different life than the one that I had. And so this led me on the path of becoming an engineer because I was not interested in becoming a lawyer. I'm a very math oriented and technically oriented person, and I figured I would lean into those skills. So I was very fortunate to get my undergrad in mechanical engineering from the University of Kansas. And that really just opened up the door for me in many ways to explore things like automotive engineering, to working with NASA for a bit. But it really came back to this idea as I was finishing my undergrad. I was thinking, well, like, why did I get this education, and where do I want to go with it next? And I began thinking on this larger policy level arena. And I was very fortunate to have seen a poster and in my university's announcements board for this Department of Engineering and Public Policy at Carnegie Mellon. And this was really a program that taught me the importance of social science and the importance of economics and other technical disciplines into sort of crafting better policy for the future. Um, and this led me down an incredible path for a number of years of working with the Department of Energy at the end of the Obama administration and working in places like Arctic Alaska, and supporting Native communities far off the road system in very remote parts of the state adapt their energy systems to be lower cost and, more importantly, lower carbon. And these were some of the most transformative moments of my work. And I began seeing again these like intersections of knowledge and ideas, and really at these sort of edge cases that there was a lot of learning to be had. And in 2017, I started this company called Natives Outdoors right at the beginning of this effort to protect the Bears Ears National Monument. Um, and it was, again, sort of looking at the landscape and seeing, there isn't really anyone on the native perspective on the for-profit side of this equation. And I was very fortunate to started this in Denver, Colorado, and it was again right place, right time, and just seeing an opportunity and running with it. I didn't know how to run a business. I emptied my retirement savings, the little retirement savings that I had from working at the Department of Energy to start this. And again, it was taking a risk. But again, it was an informed risk. It was one where, I looked at my instruments and I said, this looks like there is a there, and I'm going to put my time and energy and see where this goes. And in part, that's why I'm sitting in front of you today. And the filmmaking component, as I mentioned before, we're kind of in a different era of thinking about how information and ideas disseminate. Social media has been a huge part of this, and things like artificial intelligence will continue to shape this in the future. But I really saw the power of using compelling filmmaking to document the changes that I was seeing in places like Alaska or in the Southwest. And this was another place where, just like skiing, I had to learn and teach myself. But in the education that I had gotten, I realized in the process of learning that I could teach myself quite a lot, and that being not being good at something is actually a fun place to be. Um, so this talk really began at this place. I was formulating an idea for what I should talk about here, and I was sitting here. This is the outlet of the Klamath River as it meets the ocean. The Klamath River, within the last couple of years, had all of its dams removed, and now it's a free flowing river. And there's salmon that have returned to this river system for the first time in over 60 years. And we were able to document some of that. And of course, at these mixing zones, there's an incredible amount of life. When we were here at that time, there was eels and salmon and other things um, flowing through the lands or flowing through the river, and we were able just to take it in. And I began thinking about my own work through this lens and trying to formulate, as if I was in your shoes as students, what are the things that I should have heard or learned in that process? And I was really grateful to be able to sit here and contemplate that. So, when I think about, there's the words like multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, there's many ways of knowing, and there's many ways of approaching things. A way that an economist will look at it will look very different than, say, someone who's an historian. And one of the things is that always in these places where there's overlap on a specific issue, there can be a lot learned from these different ways of knowing. And I've always tried to lean into the places where I don't feel like I have a deeper understanding. And because I don't know doesn't mean I can't know. And so that sort of curiosity is something that and looking at these overlaps and these intersections, there's a lot of incredible stories that can come out of this. So I'm going to talk to you about five different stories that have shaped the path that I'm on, and hopefully will give you insight into the things that you've been learning as students, and sort of taking a bigger picture view on where that knowledge and your curiosity and your skills and the skills that have not been developed can take you. Um, the first I want to share with you is, of course, we did the Sacred Summits thing that I think in many ways grounded me as a Navajo person. It like made me an incredible skier. Just because the more time you put into something, you tend to get a lot better. And I was very fortunate to do that. And what this opened up for me was, in the process of doing this storytelling, I made friends with a few professional athletes, and one of them, dear friend Forrest Shearer, he's a Patagonia snowboarder and has been sort of on the leading edge of splitboarding. And he had stories about basically the things that he would do to take a snowboard in the backcountry. And through that friendship, we were discussing a story that we could potentially do in Oregon, where he has spent a bunch of time. So this is Mount Jefferson, also known as Siksika, by the Warm Springs tribe. It's the tallest peak in Oregon, and it's a foreboding presence on the landscape. And one of the things that drew us here was actually this fire. So, and this policy there was a giant fire that occurred in 2020, and this fire basically started on the western side of the mountain, which is technically the dry side of the Cascades. It's desert, high altitude desert, and on the east side is desert, and on the west side is what you would just consider your Pacific Northwest rainforest. And this is an effect of the Cascades being a coastal range. But one of the things that became that this fire elucidated was that the sort of understandings that we have about climate, and the fact that there was a belief at that time that fires very rarely go from the dry side to the wet side. And this Lion's Head fire in 2020 basically ran and lit this incredibly wet part of the Cascades and burned it to a crisp, and a number of towns were lost in that. But there is a larger thing that I think this story really allowed us to do, was to look at what were the factors and the elements that were driving this. And of course, one of them has just been how we've managed forests across this country, of using fire suppression and deleting fire from a landscape that, historically for thousands of years has been acclimatized to fire. And the indigenous peoples in these areas have used fire for quite a long time to manage these landscapes. And so one of the things that we wanted to explore is, what happens when these things change and the ways that we understand the world become different. So this fire was started by lightning on the eastern side, and prevailing winds eventually pushed it over the Cascades and burned a number of towns and destroyed a massive part of this forest. And so our journey really began following the path of the fire and where it started. And so this is not the traditional route. It's quite a lot longer. It's about 25 miles round trip. The standard route is kind of up the left southeast face of Mount Jefferson that you can see on the horizon there. But part of the story was to see the way that this fire had transformed the landscape, and to basically follow in the footsteps of what had happened just a few years earlier. So it's if for any of you that have backcountry skied, which I'm sure a number of you have, but for those that haven't, basically you put these skins on your skis and you can sort of walk over snow, and that's what we were doing here to approach this mountain. Of course, I was a new skier at that time, and my skills on skinning is quite a bit wasn't quite developed. So I had quite the challenge, and trying to keep up with three professional athletes was quite the endeavor. But one of the things that I just remembered in that process is that I was supposed to be there. I was the person that was writing the story, and helping transmute some of these ideas that these athletes had seen in their times in these incredible landscapes. But of course, all of this can be quite fun. We managed to summit Mount Jefferson, or just short. We didn't actually bring the climbing equipment to do the last 200 feet, but for our purposes, we just wanted to get down it. And the turns were incredible, and it was an incredible landscape to see that at this intersection of a wet side of the Cascade, the dry side of the Cascades, our understanding of the climate and how it's changing our world was changing rapidly. And um, it was a great story. It's now published in Patagonia. I was really excited to get this photo. I brought a cowboy hat on this trip, largely just because it's a good prop for photos. But in the process of learning this story, I began to see the power of combining images and technical and scientific knowledge to convey these important stories of how we as humans adapt to this changing world. And I think one of the pieces that I took away from this is that I for quite a long time, had a lot of despair about climate change and what it's doing to our world. And there are a lot of things that are changing. And one of the things that I just have now settled myself in is that idea is that climate change is going to present a lot of opportunities and a lot of things are going to change. But in that change, there's also opportunities for you to tell these stories, to be a part of solutions to address these larger challenges that we face. And when changes happen, it's also incredible opportunities to try out new ideas. And I think this particular trip really opened my eyes that there are going to be hard things that happen as the climate changes, but there's also going to be incredible things that happen, and the people that you meet along the way, and the teamwork and resiliency that you can build in communities is one of the most powerful tools that we have in our tool belt as humans. I want to shift us now. This is in 2022. I had the opportunity to go to the Bolivian Amazon. This is in Madidi National Park. This is, of course, in the Amazon in South America. But Bolivia and South America and some of these really iconic landscapes and ecosystems are also seeing quite a lot of human pressures. I went and I was invited by this group called Rios to Rivers to join this trip along the Tuichi River to document illegal gold mining and other sorts of mining that was happening in the Amazon, and to connect indigenous communities along the Tuichi River, where we were both upstream and downstream, such that they could, understand the impacts that mining upstream was having on the downstream communities, and to begin to build a relationship through water sports and pack rafting and rafting itself. But one of the things that I think this particular trip began pushing me, and I had to effectively throw out my previous assumptions, is that I had this mental model entering this trip that there's always indigenous peoples trying to protect landscapes, and there wouldn't be indigenous peoples sort of doing the mining. But this was a trip in which I had to understand that there was indigenous folks that were fighting to protect these landscapes and to these ecosystems, and there was also indigenous people fighting to open them up for mining. And their reasons and rationales were well understood for me, or I began learning afterwards, was really there's drivers and larger economic factors that were forcing this. And I think one of the things that I had to interrogate in there is, now with this new information, what do I do with this prior belief that I had? And a lot of that trip, I was sitting with this of like, how do I carry this forward, talk about this complexity, and convey it in a way that will inform my future work. So we there was, how should I frame this? This was a trip that had an element of danger that I was not fully aware of. I had come to Bolivia a few weeks prior, and I have a good friend from high school who works in the Bolivian Senate there. And I said, hey, I'm coming to La Paz. I'd love to see you. And she asked, like, what are you doing here? And I said, oh, I'm going to float this river, the Tuichi River. And she's like, are you sure that's the right place? And I soon learned out when we talked that 6 months prior, that her and the senator that she worked for were nearly kidnapped and killed on this stretch of river by miners in this area when they went to go inspect these mines. And, I think this added an element where, we were going to have to go past these places and past these mines and try to ask for permission. And it really opened up the complexity and the danger that exists in many parts of the world around this sort of resource development. So one of the common ways to get around in the rivers here, these are known as peke-pekes. They're like 30-foot boats that have a 15 horsepower, 10 horsepower outboard motor with a prop, and the rivers out here are shallow. And so these motors can basically bounce off the rocks and not break the prop. And in order to avoid some of these more dangerous areas where there are the mines, we decided to basically have these peke-pekes take us upstream about 40 miles and drop us off so we could avoid some of the more dangerous areas. And so Eduardo here took 2 days to drive us up the river. But of course, a trip to the Amazon is not complete without gastrointestinal distress. So Weston here had basically what we found out later was dysentery, and what I found out would eventually come and get me. The Amazon is a place that is incredibly dynamic, and through our sickness and trying to stay awake and sentient through this process, this ecosystem really pushed us far. The Amazon creates its own weather, and so every day we would watch clouds form from the evapotranspiration of the plants and then quickly turn into thunderstorms, and it would drop temperatures 40 degrees. And so I've never been as cold as in my life as I was in the Amazon, both because of being wet and because of these incredible storms, and poor Weston here fighting for his life. But this ecosystem really, and the communities and the people that we connected with on this river really began to sort of elucidate this complexity of the human experience as we contend with forces for increased resource extraction and a changing climate. And this was our team, an incredible group of folks, of a mix of Indigenous people along the entire river system. And through the course of 2 weeks, we were able to share many stories and many understandings, and both also our love for this place and how important this ecosystem is to our world. And I think really, sort of to reinforce this point, this was a trip that really pushed me. It really pushed me to both in terms of the level of expedition, how far out there we were, but also pushed me in terms of my thinking and what I believed to be true prior to that trip. And coming from away from that, I really felt that this was an opportunity to learn and to change my beliefs when confronted with new information. So a couple years passed. We've been doing a lot of work in Alaska for various projects. But in 2024, during the last administration, and for the last 40 or 50 years, there's been a big fight to open up the Alaskan Arctic to oil and gas development. So Alaska, our 50th state, basically has their entirety of their economy and their political history has really been shaped by the development of oil at Prudhoe Bay. And Prudhoe Bay is on the north slope of Alaska, which is like the northernmost part of the state. And it's an incredible landscape, but between the oil drilling pads up north and places like Anchorage down south, you have places like this, which is Gates of the Arctic National Park. These are some of the least visited national parks, and part of it is because it's incredibly challenging and costly to get up there. And we were really fortunate to get a grant from Protect Our Winters to document this place called the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska. And you wouldn't believe that this is actually our largest contiguous tract of public land in the United States. And we went there to document this region before it saw large-scale development from this oil and gas project known as the Willow Project, which is currently underway. And one of the things that this brought into focus for myself is this idea of sacrifice zones. In the name, the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska, it really depicts what its purpose was for. It was originally designated a petroleum reserve in the 1920s as the U.S. Navy was shifting from coal to oil as their primary fuel. And the president at the time didn't believe that the United States had quite enough oil to support this transition. And they did. One of those petroleum reserves is actually in Colorado. The other two are in Southern California. But this one hadn't seen this development for over 100 years. And one of the things that we began looking into this piece of land is that, people have been living here for quite a long time. And we were trying to think about how do we connect the story of this place to the larger story of us as people and as humans. Alaska is often depicted as this sort of humanless landscape where there's untrammeled wilderness, but people have been living in this part of the world for at least 16,000, 40,000, 20,000 plus years. And we wanted to find a way to tell that. And of course, the sort of backdrop of all of this is how fast the Arctic is warming. The Arctic is warming at least 2 to 3 times faster than the other parts of the world, and it's very visually present through things like permafrost collapsing and rivers changing as this permafrost melts or thaws below the rivers. So we flew to this place called Coldfoot. It's along the Trans-Alaskan Pipeline. It's called the Dalton Highway. So if you go north out of Fairbanks, you can drive all the way to Prudhoe Bay in the Arctic Ocean. But in large part, that was created in order to support this pipeline that was built in the 70s. And this pipeline moves an incredible amount of oil. But it was a stark reminder of what pressures this particular piece of land, like the MPRA, are going to see, and increasingly similar landscapes like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. One of the things that is just, so marked about being in this landscape is its scale, and also the remoteness. And so we effectively chose to go to one of the most remote parts of Alaska and technically the United States. It was about a 3.5-hour plane ride on this Cessna with floats. And we chose to go and float this section of river right at the intersection of Gates of the Arctic National Park and the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska. And it started here in the Brooks Range. And we were dropped off on this wonderful lake called Lake Ativlik. And so Lake Ativlik is a particularly interesting place because it's a place that has seen human occupation for at least 10,000 years. Along the banks of this lake, there are depressions in the ground from where there were sod igloos that were built, and something like 80 structures have been documented around here. But one of the things that we found particularly interesting about this site is that there was glass beads that were dated to have been in this at this lake site in this village that was dated to the early 1400s. But the real kicker about this is that these beads actually came from Venice, Italy. These beads had basically exchanged through human hands and were traded. And within the course of 20 to 30 years, they had moved from Italy all the way to Arctic Alaska. And the river that we were going to get on, the Naigu River, and eventually the Colville, was a major thoroughfare and transit point and trade route from the Pacific to the Arctic Ocean. And so we began our trip here. And along the way, we began seeing things like these Pleistocene era hunting blinds. Hunters in this part of the world would basically funnel caribou across the tundra into this lake, and there would be hunters in the lake in kayaks with spears, and you could see this human presence throughout this sort of landscape that has very few people in it. But it was a reminder that, the Pleistocene, 10,000 years ago, was also the last time where humans had seen the sort of level of change that we're seeing now with the climatic change that we're seeing. And they managed to make it work with quite a lot less technology, and they thrived. And this was this really important reminder for me that, in these changes, we humans are very resilient. But of course, with any good adventure, there's a lot of nice suffering that happens as well. So we got put in on the lake, and we had to do a 3 or 4 mile portage across the tundra. And for those who haven't been to or seen or experienced tundra, the tundra is not flat grass. It's basically these like tussock balls and very lumpy surface that you can twist ankles in, and it's filled with water. It's very, very, very slow moving and very hard. The most equivalent physical experience I could equate it to would be walking in about like knee deep snow. So very tiring, and pulling of boats, of course, was part of the adventure. But it allowed us to see these incredible landscapes. So as we left the Brooks Range and entered the coastal, or sorry, the tundra itself, as we made our way to the Colville, the scale of these landscapes became readily apparent. You can see our little dots, the two little pack rafters in the river there. But the scale of this place, the beauty of this place, and the 24 hours of light was quite a thing to see. Of course, one of the things that has just been so important along this trip is the friends and the people that I work with. Isaiah Branch Boyle in the foreground and James Q. Martin in the background are two of the filmmakers that I've had the chance to share a lot of these adventures with. And, through their knowledge of filmmaking, I'm a very new filmmaker myself. It's working together on how do you tell these complex stories. They have skills and knowledges and understandings that I don't, and I bring a certain set to the table. But at that intersection, we could find and create really interesting stories together. And one of the things that, I never in my wildest dreams would imagine that these sort of trips would entail would be the effect on policy. So a film that I made in 2019 called Welcome to Gwich'eghé eventually ended up on former Congressman Raul Grijalva's desk, who's a representative from down here in Tucson. And he asked me to come testify to the House Energy and Natural Resources Subcommittee about leasing in the Alaskan Arctic. And so, it's sort of a side door. It was a little bit of a side door into policymaking was through this storytelling. And I think really it confirmed for me this belief that I had initially when I started Natives Outdoors, is that these ways of knowing, these ways of telling stories and combining science and beautiful imagery as a way to sort of compel action. And one of the pieces that, Alaska is going to continue to be a part of the discussion or is going to be in the news in the months and years to come because of the resource development that's happening there. And one of the things that we were really clear is that there's the way that we name things, and it really can signal their intentions. So this story was about the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska, but there's also this wonderful place called the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. These are two ecosystems that are basically pretty much the same, and they're divided by the oil pipeline, and one side is designated for sacrifice and the other was designated for protection, but now both are facing threats. And at the core, these are political decisions, and we can have a role in that process in shaping them. And trying to think about some of the positive things that are happening. This was actually last week. I was out on this section of the lowest San Juan River. We put in at this place called the Clay Hills Crossing, was where most boaters take out. We were actually putting in to go document a section of river that is now being exposed by the low levels at Lake Powell. As you all are very aware, in Colorado, you're seeing the lowest recorded snowpack in history, as far as we know, in recorded human history. And what that's doing to places like Lake Powell and these rivers is it's re-exposing ecosystems that have been inundated by dams and reservoirs. In the background there, you can see that giant wall of dirt. That's actually sediment that was dropped by the river as it met the reservoir when the reservoir used to be up, 53 miles up the stretch of river. But one of the things is just these ecosystems are again changing, and they're changing in incredible ways. And I think being able to document and to see this change actually has given me hope. never in my wildest dreams would I imagine that an ecosystem could bounce back so quickly. But within 3 to 5 years, these sediment banks and these sediment deltas are starting to be repopulated with native plants. The rivers are recutting through this sediment and creating new channels. But in that, there's a lot of incredible stories of resilience that are occurring. So as we're in the midst of this massive drought that's going to have serious impacts, there's also this story that a river can return and the ecosystems can return, and this riparian ecosystem that supports a lot of species um, will be a part of the story moving forward. But as you can see here, this is a stretch of river that maybe 20 people go down in every year, and part of it is because you saw that waterfall. Part of it is just because of the logistics, because once you hit the lake on Lake Powell, you have to motor out 40 or 50 miles to take out. But in these stretches, you can see things changing rapidly. So this is a view about 20 miles downstream from where we put in. And you can see all of the plants that are starting to take hold in this area. But this is basically the river's elevated about 70 to 80 feet out of its original river channel because it's cutting through all of the sediment. And one of the things to look at is just how much the scale of the sediment is kind of mind-boggling. We went through 53 miles of river, and sort of alongside of us was this 10-foot bank of what we called the Domini Formation. And this is changing rapidly. And it's quite a sight to see. It's geology in action. But one of the things to note is that we have some really strange crafts a part of this. These boats are sort of aluminum skiffs. You can't run them through rock gardens like regular rafts. They have oar rigs, and then there's a motor in the back. But this is what it takes to do the science. And so part of this trip is also going out with scientists who are documenting the changes in the sediment and the way that this river is changing. And this has been a really cool part of the process to see journal articles and other sorts of media come out of this. And a huge part of this also is matching with historical photos. We have photos from across this entire section of river dating back to the 1920s. And what we were doing was matching these photos and trying to find where people took these photos as a way to sort of show the changes that are occurring down in this section of river. And at the core, it's a beautiful place to be. It's one of the areas that in this particular story, hopefully will be one that becomes a part of the story as we're seeing more and more things happen along the Colorado River this year. And really, we look at this moment we're in with the Colorado River is we're seeing a system really break down, and we're seeing the system that we had built over 100 years basically face challenges and limits that are exceeding its capacity. And I think that's in hanging out in this area and looking at these stories, it's really an opportunity to understand what rebuilding and reconstructing these systems for the next 100 to 200 years could look like. And the last of these stories is again a positive one, and one that I think about a lot. So this is the California condor. In the 1980s, there was only 22 of these birds left in the wild. Scientists didn't really understand at the time why these birds were dying. But what they eventually found out is that lead bullets primarily, and then human pressure was causing these birds to functionally go extinct. And one of the things that has happened is that over the course of a few decades, scientists and advocates and tribes in this area have fought to bring these birds back. So these 22 birds were brought into a captive breeding program. And basically, they were able to begin repopulation of these birds across the region. And so part of my work has actually been telling the Yurok story. The Yurok tribe in Northern California has been working on a reintroduction program for the last 14 years. And we've been able to watch close to 10 of these birds get re-released. But for the Yurok, the condor is a massive part of their cultural understanding of themselves as a people. And so for them, they have a vested interest in bringing back this bird because it also means a cultural vitalization for themselves. These birds are incredibly interesting. They are sort of have the temperament of house cats, but they play an important ecosystem role in as their scavengers, and those scavengers allow animals to be cleaned up from the landscape to basically there could be less disease vectors for other animals, and so they play an important ecosystem role. But at the core of this is, of course, scientists and the people who have dedicated their lives to focusing on this one thing of taking care of these birds. And so part of this was spending time with these scientists in this in uh, doing health checkups and checking these birds' blood for lead. And thankfully, we didn't. But this is a huge part of this work. And one of the things I always try to remember about this is that these are policies decisions, and these are people dedicating their lives. And what we have seen is basically an entire species brought back from the brink of extinction. So, a few thoughts I want to leave you with is of course, this is a lot of different stories and adventures, and I hope many of you are able to see these for yourself. But one of the things that I've always come away from this work is that it's easy to sit on the sidelines and say what's wrong. The harder work and the much more interesting work and the much more fulfilling work is to think about what we can build. And I came from a place of having a lot of frustration about the environmental injustices that were facing my community, and I started thinking about ways that I could change that, and that's led me here. Highly recommend you sit with this idea. But one of the things that I just constantly try to remind you all in moving forward is you have the training that you do now and the things that you do now, but you will continue to learn and continue to be a lifelong learner and look for these intersections. If you might not know an area, it doesn't mean that you can't or shouldn't know that area of knowledge. Go out and seek it, because when you apply what you know already to maybe a new area of learning, you're going to bring a very different insight to these really important issues that we face globally. And really, where do your worlds collide? All of you come from, wide and diverse backgrounds and lived experiences, and there's a lot of things that all of those elements bring to the table. Um, and I always say, start with the problem, not the discipline. There's a lot of ways of approaching issues and solving them, and it's going to take many of us in the process. So, 4 ideas I want to leave you with is, if you don't know how to do it scared, do it imperfectly. And curiosity is a professional skill. Do it before you're ready. There's nothing wrong with complexity, and there's nothing wrong with not knowing or having two conflicting ideas about an issue. And seek these edges, seek kind of the edges of knowledge, and you're going to find out a lot of interesting things there. But one of the things that I just would leave you with is ask a different question. And now, with the knowledge that you all have and where you all are headed, it's going to be your turn. I'm all us gray hairs are eventually going to be moving on and doing other things, and this is going to eventually going to be your responsibility. So, this is going to be an incredible opportunity for you all moving into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Len. That was incredibly inspiring. So many lessons from amazingly beautiful places and adventures you've been on. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. That was a great journey that you've shared. And I feel inspired, especially from this idea of constantly listening, learning new things, and allowing it to change our beliefs, and being opportunistic for the future, creating change. And now I want to welcome any of you in the audience to pose any questions you might have for Len. You can use the chat there, and we will monitor those questions and bring them out to Len. So please feel free to ask away.
Dr. Necefer, this is John Lawrence, one of the deans that'll help with questions. But while we're waiting for them to come in, I think that last slide was very helpful for people to think about the future. But where do you think today's students we'll look back and say we were asking the wrong questions?
Hmm. Uh, I think, one of the things that I constantly contend with is um, there's a lot of things that I don't think we're moving fast enough on. And part of that is because of, our institutions move slow. And I think, especially, I think about younger generations and the things that I poked and prodded my dad of, like, why did you, why did you allow these things to happen? I think as I notice as I've gotten older, it's easy to be complacent and just to say, oh, well, that's the way things are. Or that's the way that, it's been done and it can't change. And I think one of the things that I try to remind myself is that institutions can change, policies can change, and they can happen really quickly. And I think, I think we're in a place now where we're going to have to reimagine a lot of the ways that we need to do things because they're not working, like especially around the Colorado River. And I think we can't fall back into that place of just seeking security and because or avoiding change. Change is something that we're all uncomfortable with, and I think courageous leadership that's going to come in the future and will make this are going to be people that usher us through um, this big change and can help us see through to the other side. There's a question there of like, in your view, how much of the current system needs to collapse, what parts of it to achieve a sustainable human nature relationship? I'm actually, um, I believe in institutions. Institutions are one of the greatest gifts that we can give generations after us. And I think that, when we look throughout history, societal collapse or institutional collapse is never a good thing. Generally speaking, like there's instances where that's of course not the case. Like where some of my family's from in communist Romania, that was kind of a place that yeah definitely needed to see that. But one of the things that can come in that is there's a lot of people with a lot of ideas of how they want to see things that are different, and they might not be aligned with yours. And I think that's one of the moments where institutions and the democratic process and allowing us to have deliberation among different ideas generally results in better outcomes in terms of its social acceptability. And I think that there's an incredible value that, as you're doing your work and as you're moving forward in life of, you know, if the institutions that you wish to see aren't there, build them, make them a part of that equation. I think Rita has a question here.
Actually, we have one from a student.
Great.
She had asked, this is from Rachel Leva. She asked how that she thought your presentation was exciting, and she asked, what are you going to be doing next? What's next on the agenda for Len?
A lot of not fun work travel, but I'm gonna go up and film some more of those condors in Northern California in a week or so. Always trying to get up to Alaska, but it's always a $15,000, $20,000 endeavor to go do it. But so hopefully that. But more of this year, we're going to be spending a lot more time on the Colorado River. This fall, there's just going to be a lot of really consequential and important moments that are going to occur, and we're going to try to be there to document them. And so, a lot more time on Lake Powell, a lot more time on the cataract section of the Colorado River, and yeah.
Anne, do you have another question?
Sorry,
See,
I lost my place. Let me go grab the questions there.
That's okay. I've got it.
Okay,
Sarah
so-
Johnson writes, if anybody has questions, please put them into the chat. We're doing them in order. So Sarah Johnson says it takes a lot of courage to do the things that you're scared of and have no idea how they'll work out. What grounds you and helps you have the courage to do hard things? And can you offer the students ideas on how to be brave and courageous to do those hard things?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is it's reorienting your brain a little bit about taking joy in progress that is made. So when I was skiing, I could only do left turns for a while. And it was that moment where I was able to start doing left turns and or right turns and feel really confident and really um, taking deep pleasure and joy out of that, that sort of jump in capacity and learning and really, if you don't know where to start, just starting small really is truly it. And um, it's hard, as we get older, it becomes a harder thing to take on new ideas or new hobbies or technologies and things like that. I mean, it can be one of those things, but being sort of leaning into that and leaning into that discomfort is actually a place where really interesting things can happen. And I would just say, it will be hard for sure, but knowing that if you put in enough time, you're going to be pretty capable of it pretty quickly. And I would just say, skiing is pretty hard learning, but yeah, in the season of just focusing on it and making it something that I was just gonna become better at, and I didn't know what that meant, and just taking joy in that progress was really something I just find it's going to be different for all of you, but just don't be scared of not knowing. If you don't know, it's an opportunity to learn.
I do see a question from Riley. Is there any opportunity for students to help with your cause? How would we start documenting these changes?
Well, we're a small business, so I don't know. I wish we could, do more. But one of the things I would just say is you have phones in your pockets, and those are incredible tools with the cameras that they have on them, and those photos are something that future people might have interest in. There's going to be an entire field of an area called digital archaeology. If you've ever heard of the company called Flickr, which is like the largest photo sharing website, they're shifting their ideas about their business model to this idea of digital archaeology, because in the future, the past is going to have to be reconstructed by a lot, in large part by the things that we have on our phones. And so, taking that long-term view of, the things and photos that you document might be interesting to people 100 years in the future.
Max asks, I'm curious if you have any insights into the process of decolonizing the mind. Is it possible? Does it involve some sort of hybridization of different paradigms?
That is a question that could have an hour-long conversation. I mean, if we talk about colonization in the West, I kind of think of it about as an omelet. It's really hard to uncook an omelet. Things are permanently changed, at least for Indigenous peoples. And there's ways of knowing that I think Indigenous communities bring to the table with things like science and understanding. So the stuff that we were doing in various parts of the world have intersected that. And, at least in my work, I take the approach of, there's multiple ways of knowing. Some might be right, some might be wrong, some might be helpful. And they might not agree. And it's in those moments to just sort of figure out, where does the truth lie? And all of that is, it's a challenge. And I would say in a lot of the work that I do, it sort of is that hybrid and intersection there. But I would say, you know, go to another country and go to a place that you don't speak the language and go into a context where you have no bearing. And if you can figure that out, that'll give you I think the answer that you're looking for.
When Jordan mentions that he's in water science in Summit County and that the commissioner just called out this year as an apocalypse, and mentions that systemic change is multidisciplinary, and wondering, with your experience around multiple fields, if there's a discipline that you feel is bringing the most change.
Um, well, I'm gonna poo-poo on lawyers a little bit, but a lot of our science policy and a lot of the policy that we have is written by lawyers and analyzed by lawyers, and that's the nature of the system that we have. And um, uh, lawyers play an important role in our system, but it is one way of knowing. And I have found that in a lot of instances that the view that they have is limited in some respects. And this is true for a lot of different disciplines. And I think, we're in this moment where inherently what's happening on the Colorado River is a political issue. It is an issue of 7 states, of 2 basins, of negotiations that are happening. And one of the things that I think is going to need to happen is that people like you all, students, the public, interested individuals, need to start being a part of that discussion because, and what can motivate that, of course, to toot my own horn is like social media. You can drive that. Film and media, changing culture, I think is important. And things like art, getting people to see the world differently or through a different lens, I think is really important. And the other is the humanities and the social sciences. At the core, this is a social issue with people, imperfect as we are, and systems that we have created that are driving this. And I think there's a lot to be learned from those disciplines as well. And I think especially with what we're facing, we're going to have to sort of draw on all of those.
We have time for one more question, and it's from Rita Marsh. Your wisdom regarding paying attention to the gift of a beginner's mind was encouraging to hear. What does the role of ceremony, of ritual, play in your adventures?
I would say the place where it played a lot was in the Sacred Summits piece that I did. This was partially just learning Navajo creation stories in some of our songs. But I think that's a complicated answer for me. I'm I'm an atheist, so I would say the things that I do, I always come back to having respect to the landscapes and at least making some acknowledgement of some of these instances, especially in mountains like an avalanche terrain, the power of these places, and to be humble and have a lot of humility, and to know that these places can end my life in a second, and knowing that they have those powers, I think is just, it's just a standard part of being humble and in these contexts where, there's a lot that you can try to control for, and there's a lot of things that you can't, and just, just being at peace with some of that.
Thank you, Len. Thank you so much. That was very, very well put. And all these places, we are so grateful for you being here, sharing these places with us, and helping us think differently about how we step into the future. So thank you again. We really appreciate you, and we'll be sharing the recording out with anyone who registered. So if anybody wants to go back to some of those really great slides that Len created, you'll have those too.
All right.
Okay,
Thank you so
everyone.
much, y'all.
Yep. Thank you. All right, before everyone takes off, I just want to remind you that we still have some afternoon events. We also want to thank all of the faculty and staff who made this conference possible, the moderators, the faculty who prepared the students, our IT staff. Thank you so much. Thank you, Valerie Lemaster, for all of your coordination work leading up to this day. Thank you to the students' families and friends and partners and pets and others who have really been supportive through their journeys. And thank you most of all to our presenting students. You put a lot of work into your projects, you're passionate about them, and this day is really all about celebrating you and all of your hard work as you step into the future. And we also want to thank community partners for joining us. We really appreciate working with you and all the opportunities for internships and interviews and working with our students. So thank you for being involved with Colorado Mountain College. And again, I just want to remind all of you about the 3 afternoon events before you depart. We really would love for you to join us and our students at one of these 3 locations. We have the Spring Valley Community Garden Party and Sustainability Poster Session from 2 to 3 o'clock at the Spring Valley Greenhouse. And then at the Steamboat campus, we have a celebration at the Bear Park Permaculture Center from 12:30 to 2:30 with students and sharing their posters, some great refreshments. So head on over to Bear Park. That's happening soon. And then at the Leadville campus, we've got the Ecology and Stewardship in Practice with students and faculty from Ecosystem Science and Stewardship. And that's happening later this afternoon from 3 to 5. So we hope you'll stick around in these 3 beautiful locations and continue the conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you again for joining us.